Watch out! Here comes George Schlackegg.
The one and only.
Can you fix a bike? What a question! Hey everyone, welcome to Bicycle Touring Talk 37. If you watched my last few episodes, you may have noticed that I had to seek help for relatively minor bike problems. As a matter of fact, the last repair, a broken spoke, was really goofy. I actually had some of the correct spokes somewhere in my panniers, but I had totally forgotten about it and taken hours-long bus rides to solve the problem. Even when my derailleur got bent in Campeche, I honestly thought it could have been the end of my tour. In case you haven't figured it out by now, besides doing basic maintenance like oiling my chain and cleaning the bike, I had no clue about how to fix bicycles. Yet, somehow I managed to cycle across 6 US states and 6 Mexican states on a 13-year-old bike that wasn't even perfect to start with. I knew how to fix a flat tire, but wasn't even good at that. Thankfully, good touring bikes are simple, so even if you don't have a clue about mechanics, you will often be able to figure out why something doesn't work the way it should. When you can't fix a problem, it's time to reach out. Bicycles are widespread around the globe, and the technology is well established. Most often, someone with the expertise you need will be within reach. I have found that those people usually love bicycles and the idea that someone on a big tour needs their help. Bicycle touring is exciting. When you ask someone local for help, you allow them to become part of something they probably value. This is how lifelong friendships can be formed, or at least some memories that you can look back on much later. That's not to say that you shouldn't bother with learning the mechanics of your bike, inside and out. But if your skills are not perfect, it shouldn't hold you back. I was overconfident before my tour, thinking that as a former mechanic, I would have no problems fixing whatever could happen to my bike. Bikes are simple, right? This was just another lesson I had to learn the hard way, and it took a 5,000 kilometer bike ride. Taking a course in bicycle mechanics before a major tour is highly recommended. Another way is to overhaul your own bike. Everyone has a different learning style. The point is that it is helpful to be familiar with your bike, because sooner or later something will go wrong. I learned bike mechanics after my trip because I loved bikes enough so that I could no longer be ignorant about how they work. Have you ever heard someone say that they enjoyed their job so much that they would do it for free? Sometime after my first major bike tour, I joined Edmonton Bicycle Commuters Society, now known as Bike Edmonton, as a volunteer. Bike Edmonton is a non-profit organization that operates 2 volunteer-run bike shops in Edmonton, Alberta. Volunteering is a great way to learn bike mechanics in the most hands-on way. At BikeWorks, we accept donated bikes no matter what condition they may be in. The ones that are beyond repair get stripped for reusable parts before the rest gets recycled. Others get refurbished and sold at affordable prices. Overhauling old bikes is a fantastic way to learn about bike mechanics. A great resource is the Park Tool website and even the catalog by that company. Park Tool has been specializing in bicycle-specific tools for decades. Their tools can be pricey, but they are among the best in the industry. Not only do they have the right tools, they also know how to fix any bike problem imaginable. And their website, parktool.com, has tons of information. If you're traveling without internet access for long stretches, it might be a good idea to get the Park Tool catalog in book form and carry it with you. It weighs only a few grams and easily fits into your panniers. Another great resource is the Sheldon Brown website. Sheldon Brown was one of the best known bicycle mechanics ever, and his publications cover pretty much everything you might run into. Bicycles are essentially simple, but there are certain things that change as time goes on. Some parts you will find on newer bikes are no longer compatible with the older bikes. Bicycle manufacturers are always striving to make their bikes better, lighter, more comfortable, and faster. Some of the changes they make can complicate your bike for no good reason other than a marketing stunt. For that reason, I recommend a relatively basic bike for touring. It's important that you carry the right tools to match your bicycle and avoid hauling anything unnecessary, but are still prepared to work on all major components of your own bike. As already mentioned, an older, simpler bike will often give you less trouble. For example, friction shifters hardly need adjustment, while index shifters have to be set just right, or they may skip gears. Examples of parts that require specific tools are bottom brackets and headsets. While the principles are always more or less the same, the parts may look very different from one bike to another, and they may be incompatible. That's why it's important to familiarize yourself with your bike and make sure you've got the right tools. In many countries, people depend on bicycles for transportation. Very simple bikes using parts that have been designed decades ago are still in the majority. I've found that a 1980s mountain bike is ideal for touring in most countries. While no mountain bike enthusiast in North America would even think about using a 1980s bike for a single track, those bikes are easily adapted to touring. Many of them can be bought for cheap. Not only do their relatively thick tires have advantages on rough roads or trails and are easy to get off the rim in case of a flat, they're also the most common in the world, so you won't have trouble finding a replacement. There are many other standardized components on those bikes that are commonly available just about anywhere. The tools required are the most basic, and those bikes are among the easiest to learn inside and out. A great way is to overhaul an old mountain bike and then take it on tour. Most of those bikes never came with racks and fenders, so you will have to add them yourself, which is usually pretty simple. While you're at this, make sure you have the right handlebars and stem combination, and a seat that allows you to ride for many hours without pain in your butt. Those are simple things at first glance, but there's always more than meets the eye. Handlebars have things attached. There are the brake handles, which have to be easy to reach when riding the bike. They also have cables attached which run along the frame, front and back, to where the brakes and derailleurs are. It is a good idea to inspect the entire system carefully before going on tour. On older bikes, you may find that cables are corroded to the point where replacing them is necessary. It's best to replace both the cables and the housing, which is the flexible plastic coated tube the cables run through, where they are not guided along the frame. Both are inexpensive and you will not have to worry about them much once they are replaced and adjusted properly. The brakes have more items to check. There are several different types of brakes, some of which are harder to work on than others. Older bikes have rim brakes, which means that the brake pads are pushing against the rim when activated. It's important that they are attached securely, move freely, and are properly adjusted. Also on your handlebars are the shifters, which operate in a manner that is quite similar to the brakes. When it comes to gears, simplicity is the key to a good touring bike. Look at the sprockets on the rear wheel and the chain wheels on the cranks. How many are there? 6 in the rear and 3 in the front is sufficient as long as they are the right size to allow for climbing hills with a load. You may have to experiment with that. The more gears you have, the harder they are to adjust. The cluster of rear sprockets is called a cassette. There are 2 types. The first one is a freewheel. A freewheel has an internal mechanism that allows the sprockets to turn freely in one direction. This allows you to coast down a hill without moving your cranks. The other type of cassette doesn't have this mechanism and is essentially just a cluster of sprockets that slides onto a spline that's extending from the hub. In that case, the freewheel mechanism is part of the hub, which is called the freewheel hub. Assembled, both types look similar and it can be hard to tell them apart, but service procedures are quite different. There are 2 steps to determining if work is needed. The first one is take out your rear wheel and spin the axle by hand. Does it turn easily or does it feel rough? Next, set the wheel on a solid surface and hold both ends of the axle. Try to wiggle it. Up on one side, down on the other. Is there play? Either of these conditions requires some overhauling. Sometimes all that's needed is thorough cleaning, fresh grease, perhaps new ball bearings, and some adjustment. Sometimes more is needed. For the exact procedures, consult a bicycle manual, the Park Tool Catalog, the Sheldon Brown website, or search a YouTube video. I actually happen to have one that covers the hub. While looking at the wheels, also check the spokes. Are they all equally tight? On the rear wheel, the spokes on the drive side will be slightly tighter than the ones on the opposite side. Put the wheel back onto your bike, or, even better, a truing stand. Spin it to see if it runs true. If there's significant wobble, the wheel requires truing. That's best done with the tire removed. The spokes are attached to the rim via nipples that have internal threads. The spoke tension is what determines the trueness of your rim. To straighten a rim, it is necessary to adjust individual spokes in key locations. To do this successfully, you have to make sure all the nipples move freely, so sometimes it's a good idea to soak them in penetrating oil before starting. Okay, I'm not going to describe the entire truing process here, but here are some key points. If you're looking down on your rim, find a spot that is way too far to the left. Identify the spokes on the opposite side of the rim in that area. Those will need to be tightened. That will pull the rim slightly to the right. You will need a spoke wrench of the correct size to do that. It is best to go only about a quarter turn at a time. Also note that the threads are inside the nipple, so when you're looking down, you'll have to turn them counterclockwise to tighten them. Once you tighten those spokes on one side of the wheel, you may have to loosen the adjacent spokes on the other side by the same amount. Truing wheels successfully requires some practice. It is best to have someone demonstrate the process and then practice on a scrap wheel if you've never done it before. Too much technical stuff for you? bear with me, you're almost done. The front hub and bottom bracket both have bearings that are similar to the ones of the rear wheel. After overhauling your rear hub, you will find it easy to do the front one as well. For the bottom bracket, a few other steps come into play. You will have to remove the cranks before servicing the bearings, which requires a crank puller and sometimes a lot of patience. Once you get to the bearing itself, you may find that the race that is threaded into the bottom bracket tube on the drive side, where the chain wheels go, has reverse thread. You'll have to twist it clockwise to loosen it. Working on the bottom bracket requires special wrenches. Wheel hubs and bottom bracket require plenty of grease and a similar way of adjusting, which involves tightening of the bearing parts just enough to allow them to move freely without play, and then tightening a lock nut to hold that adjustment. If you've never done this before, it's probably a good idea to watch someone do it. Even experienced mechanics do this by trial and error, and sometimes it takes a few tries. There's one more crucial bearing on your bicycle that adjusts in the same manner. The handlebars and fork are connected to the frame via the headset. The headset only rotates back and forth as you're steering your bike, but wear and tear is common because this mechanism is supporting much of your weight and that of any luggage when you're riding. To see if your headset needs service, check if it moves freely, then push your bike forward against a wall. Apply the front brake to lock the wheel. Now rock the bike back and forth lightly. If there's any movement of the handlebars or the fork, it means there's too much play. Adjustment procedures are simple, but if there's significant play, it is always a good idea to inspect the parts of the headset more closely. Again, work on the headset requires special wrenches and some other tools. Of course, we must pay attention to the parts that make your bike move. The drivetrain. I already mentioned the cassette, or the cluster of sprockets on your rear wheel, and the bottom bracket, which your cranks and pedals are attached to. There are chain wheels on those cranks which are connected to the cassette via a chain. All of those parts are subject to wear and tear. Usually the chain will wear out first. If your chain is rusty and does not move freely, it's best to replace it. If it seems fine, but you just aren't sure how old it is, take a 12-inch ruler and measure 12 inches from the center of one of the pins. If the 12-inch mark is aligned with the center of another pin, your chain is practically new. If the pin is about 1/16 of an inch past the 12-inch mark, it may be time to replace the chain. Now, if the pin is 1/8 of an inch past the 12-inch mark or more, it's time to inspect your sprockets. They will likely show wear, and it is best to replace them as well. The chain is guided by derailleurs, front and rear. The derailleurs are also used to shift gears. They are operated by shifters via cables. There are only two adjustments on the derailleurs themselves: high limit and low limit. You will see the tiny screws marked H and L if you look at them closely. Those adjustments ensure that your chain always stays on the sprockets, while providing access to the entire range of gears. Those are typically the first adjustments to be made when setting up a drivetrain. The adjustment is off when the chain can jump off or when any of the outside sprockets can't be reached. Another adjustment is cable tension. It is especially tricky to set up index shifters on a rear wheel with more than 7 gears. Friction shifters hardly require cable adjustment, except for a very basic one. The rider's hands determine how the bike shifts. Some skill is involved, but that's easy to acquire. Friction shifters are less prone to trouble, and I would definitely recommend them for a touring bike. Index shifters need special cable housings that ensure more precise and smooth operation. Cable tension may have to be readjusted from time to time. This breakdown is by no means complete, but it covers some of the essentials you need to check before you take any bike on an extended tour. I'll be honest with you, when I set out on my first bike tour, I was not well prepared. I had no idea how to check or service even basic components of my bike. You can do better than that. I'm hoping this video will help guide you. You'll simply enjoy your trip more when your bike is in good shape. If all you can afford is an older, second-hand bike and you don't have the means to overhaul it completely, work with what you've got rather than canceling your tour. The worst that can happen is that you'll break down and learn a few things. Don't sweat the small stuff. One last thing, make sure your seat is comfortable. A comfortable seat will make the difference between a pleasant bike tour and a torture that will burn through the skin on your bum. We're all built slightly different, and a seat that works for some may not work well for others. It's not always the most expensive saddle that's most comfortable neither. It took me a while to learn that lesson, and now I swear by the Brooks B17, a leather seat that is not padded but adapts to your shape and becomes more comfortable with wear. As you see, there really isn't that much to a bike. You can definitely learn how to fix one and start your tour with confidence. In my next episode, I'll tell you about my last days in Mexico before returning to Canada. You can read about my tour in Destinations Are Fake. There's a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and you might want to catch up on some of my other videos in this series. It's all based on this. See you soon!